So I'm going to go over the basic strategies that you'll need to conduct a rhetorical analysis. And that is just to analyze the rhetorical choices that the author, the speaker, the writer is using to convey a message and to convince your audience to do something. So we usually use SOAPSTone, and so I'm going to break down exactly what that means. So SOAPSTone stands for speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, and tone. And so I'm going to go through each of these in a moment, but you might want to jot down this quick, acronym so you can remember, but I'm going to go through each letter. I'll give you a second or so to gather some information. All right, so speaker. The speaker is not just like the person's name, right? The speaker is, this is the speaker's like persona, or the image that they put out there for us. Remember how I talked about brand? It is the speaker's brand. So you want to be asking yourself, not just like, what's the person's name, but like, who is this person? Okay. Kind of like a profile. What is their background? Are they associated with any organizations that you know of? What are they passionate about? All those things matter because they're not just anybody, right? Like, you want to know what they represent, right? So one example is Martin Luther King Jr. Was an African-American minister who was very much a part of the civil rights movement and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work. So some people have the name recognition that you could go, oh, I know this about this person, but how much do you know, right? Like, knowing as much as you possibly can about the speaker's background can tell you things like hidden motivations or agendas. It can tell you what their beliefs are or their values. And so while you're reading their writing or listening to them give a speech, then you know what they're passionate about already if you know the speaker's persona. Or if they contradict it, which happens fairly often when people say, well, I believe in this, I'm down for the cause, right? So let's say that I am a climate change activist, but you catch me littering, right? Then that goes against the image that I have presented. So you really want to dig deep into what your speaker's persona is when you're looking at a piece of text, because if I can't trust my speaker, if I don't believe who they are, like, they're not going to be able to convince me or any other audience to do what it is that they want us to do or believe or what have you. So keep in mind that speaker doesn't just mean like what's their name. Like, I want to know, what does this speaker represent? What do they believe? What's their background? And what are they associated with? So as much of that as you could possibly muster when you are looking at a piece of text, make sure that you include it in your analysis. Occasion. So it's important to know what prompts the argument, right? Like, what's the occasion that brought this speaker to the stage or on television or what have you? Has anything historical or significant happened right at the moment? Well, 9/11 just passed, but President George Bush's speech on 9/11 happened because of a tragic event. So you really want to be thinking about, like, what prompted our speaker to speak, okay? Is this person responding to something that happened, or is it just an important cause that has been going on for a while, like many of the protests that we're seeing? So you want to be asking, like, what's the occasion? Is it an official occasion? So for example, commencement addresses, like, that's graduation. So it's an official occasion that the speaker has been asked to speak at. Is the occasion an election campaign? Is it an advertisement? Is it a graduation speech? because each of these occasions might bring different types of delivery, right? Like a graduation speech often is inspirational, right? The tone and the diction is usually very positive, very uplifting, right? Whereas an advertisement is very like, go, 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 get it, get it, get it. So you want to be asking yourself, like, what exactly is the occasion? Because that kind of like sets the tone. It creates the atmosphere for your speaker, as I kind of just mentioned right here. So the tone and the mood is kind of set by this occasion. It can build a sense of urgency. So like just the occasion itself can persuade people to do something right away because something has happened, right? So there are a lot of times that maybe we're not convinced to act on something until something happens. So the occasion kind of sets that tone. And the speaker has to really respond to that occasion. So just keep in mind the occasion is incredibly important. It's what brings the speaker to speak in the first place. And so my example down here is just like that. The commencement speeches like often inspire young adults to take action, right? Like they usually challenge them to do something after they graduate. So keep in mind that occasions usually prompt the audience to do something in particular, or believe or think about something in particular. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about the occasion. Audience. So knowing who the intended audience is. So notice that I'm using the terminology intended here because we often get confused or confuse intended audience with us, right? Like, oh, I'm reading this, so they're speaking to me. Not necessarily. So you want to keep in mind that you are not always the audience. So you may be asking yourself, just who is the intended audience? That intended audience is the audience that is sitting before the speaker. There are different levels of audiences, but you want to be thinking about who is the speaker addressing at the time. So for example, when you guys finish reading a letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King is not speaking to us, okay? So we're the reader, but we are not the folks who he is addressing. We know now after reading the clergyman's letter that he is addressing the clergyman. So you want to keep that audience in mind when you think about the choices that he's making with his language, with the way that he structures his letter, what he decides to the choices that he makes all throughout the letter is for a particular audience, and that audience is not us. I'm almost certain that he might be very shocked to find out that in the year 2020, students in high schools around the nation would be reading this letter that he wrote in jail to this group of clergymen. So just keep in mind that you are not the intended audience. Like, are you a audience? Yeah, because you got to read it, but you're not the person that they intended the message for. So just keep that in mind. The levels of audiences matter as well. So especially now, when people speak on television, for example, sometimes they have a live audience. When we're at like award show, there are award shows, there are people sitting right in front of the speaker. So their intended audience, their immediate audience, that's the folks who are sitting right in front of them, right? But there are audiences beyond the immediate. They know that they're also on TV. And so there are millions of people watching them on TV. And then we know now that the message goes even further than that, right? So something happens on TV now, where do we really view it, right? Like I stopped watching award shows. Why? Because I can just go to Twitter and get all the highlights. So they know that they even have a third audience of people who will be looking at what it is that they have to say. So when a speaker is speaking, their intended audience may extend beyond the people that are sitting before them. So keep that in mind as well. especially when you're looking at a piece of writing from an author who is, you know, trying to create some change. They're creating a legacy of some sort. So an example of that might be the Declaration of Independence. Like, the intended audience is the king, right? However, this piece of writing was so powerful that I'm almost certain that Thomas Jefferson knew that other people beyond the king was going to, you know, engage with this text. So just keep that in mind, okay? When you're thinking about your audience, you need to know them, right? So this intended audience, you want to know them just as deeply as you know the speaker. So what is the audience's, what are their fears? What are their needs? What are their concerns? Because our speaker will be speaking directly to that. So for example, back in 2016, Senator Hillary Clinton used her concession speech to speak directly to women in the audience and empower them to push forward despite her loss. So she was speaking to people who supported her, right? But she was also speaking to women in the audience. Like, just because I lost, it doesn't mean that we can't push forward and maybe someone else can win this one day. So just keep in mind that the intended audience, even if it seems like they're speaking to everybody, there may be someone in particular, as I'm talking to you, right? If we like to call it, sometimes if you are speaking to someone who already agrees with you, then we call it preaching to the choir, right? Like, they already agree with you. They, you know, you're not really speaking to them. So keep in mind, like, who they're really directing this information to. Like, if I already agree, they're probably not talking to me. If they are, what are their intentions in talking to me who already, you know, is in agreement with what they have to say? Are they trying to mobilize me? Do they want me to do something right now? So keep that in mind as well. But you want to know your audience, because every time you think about the choices that the speaker is making in their writing or speech or advertisement or what have you, you want to be thinking about what emotions or sensibilities or beliefs or values that they're speaking to within that particular audience. So again, going back to this example with Hillary Clinton kind of talking to women, she's not just talking to just any old woman, right? Like, Miss Moten is not running for a public office, right? She's speaking to women who maybe thought, you know what, I might run, but I don't know. I've never seen a woman in this position before. So she's trying to mobilize them. She's like, no, you can do it. Just because it didn't work out for me doesn't mean that it won't work out for you, which we saw in the 2 years later when we voted for Congress, that more women were, you know, elected into Congress that year. So sometimes the intended audience is, I won't even say sometimes, the intended audience is just as important as the speaker, because without an audience, like, who are you talking to, right? So you really want to know who your audience is as well, okay? All right, purpose. So we have the speaker's message here. Like, okay, what message or what lesson are they trying to teach us? Or what is the central idea? Like, what's the message that they're trying to convey? This combines both the speaker's opinion about something and their intention, right? So let's say that I believe that all students should do their homework, right? So that's just like my opinion. Like, I just think they should, right? But my intention is about convincing that audience, right? So my intention is to get you to do your homework. Okay, so opinion is not action-based. It's just like, this is how I feel, right? But intention is based in persuasion. Like, okay, well, what do I intend for my audience to do, think, or believe? And so we're going to talk about that within this purpose idea. So when we're talking about purpose, you want to be thinking about actually 4 different things. And I'm actually going to, let me use my screen here. Mm, okay, so you guys can see me pretty clear, I think. All right, let's take a look at this board because that might help just a bit. So if we're talking about the speaker's purpose, we're talking about what they want their audience to do, okay, think, believe, or feel, okay? And these are actually connected to the appeals, right? So if I want my audience to feel something, right? Like I want them to feel sad, or I want them to feel angry, or I want them to feel motivated or empowered, just as the example that I use, feel is directly related to pathos, appeal, right? Emotions. Okay, and so my dog decides he wants to bark. Are we finished? Okay. So believe is directly connected to ethos appeal. Okay. You guys may recognize the, okay. Okay, so before my dog started barking, we have believe, which is associated with ethos appeal. Remember, ethos is all about building a sense of trust, right? So if I want you to believe something, usually it's believe me, right? Like believe me as a person, right? Like I hope that you trust me, so then I can convince you to probably do, think, or feel something, okay? So does the speaker want his or her audience to believe something, okay? So then we have think. Think is associated with pathos appeal as well. Actually, I'm sorry, not pathos. Ooh. Think, do, believe. What am I missing? Oh, I'm sorry. Think is logos. Logos appeal. Okay. So logos is all about that message. And I'm going to put clear here. So clear message. All right. Not a jumbled up message that no one's going to understand. All right. So think is associated with logos, which means to deliver a clear message. So if I am trying to convince my audience to do, think, believe, feel, I need to make sure that my message is nice and clear. And so sometimes people deliver messages or deliver speeches, arguments in order to clear things up, right? To clarify something they may have said earlier, or to clarify like data or findings that they have. So keep in mind, logos is important, very important to your message as well, because so of course ethos, right? You have to trust your speaker, right? And knowing the audience is really important, because if I don't know my audience, like what's the point? How am I going to convince them? But if my message makes absolutely no sense, you're not going to convince anybody to do anything. So keep in mind that intention could also be to get their audience to think. And I also like to think of this as like, not just thinking, but like reflecting. Okay, think or reflect on something. And then last but not least, we have do, which is associated with kairos, okay? And that is building a sense of urgency. And so I'll put here, take action. So sometimes when the speaker is speaking, they want their audience to take some kinds of actions, right? Like, oh, I need to go do something right now, okay? So when we think of purpose, I want you guys to think about whether or not they want their audience to do, think, believe, or feel. It's not that they could just have them do one of these things either. Like maybe at the beginning of the speech, they wanted them to believe who they were, right? And then later on in the speech, they wanted them to feel sad or what have you. So these intentions can be different throughout the text, okay? Like purpose doesn't have to be just one thing. All right. There is usually one that, you know, is seen throughout the text, right? And that's the one that you want to, it seems like they want like if I'm telling people to get out and vote, maybe I have them feel empowered to go vote, right? Maybe I make them believe that I know the best thing or what have you. Maybe I have them think about, voter suppression or what have you. And then eventually I want them to go out and vote. So I might use or incorporate all of these different things, but the meat and potatoes of my purpose for delivering that particular address is to get them to do something. Sometimes it may be to believe something, etc. So just keep in mind that you may see all four of these, and actually really good speeches incorporate all four of these. So just keep that in mind. All right. So that is our, do, think, believe, feel kind of deal when we're talking about purpose. So you want to be thinking about, why did the speaker say what they said to the audience, right? Like, well, what your questions all throughout when you're analyzing something should be like, why they choose that word? Why did they say it that way? Why would they say that to this particular audience? Okay. Then you want to be asking yourself, like, how, what they're saying, like, how did they say it? Like, and not even just say it, like, how did they use language here? How did they use their sentence structure? What's rhetorical strategy? Did they use a rhetorical question? Did they use expert testimony? Did they use an allusion here? Be asking yourself how, right? And of course, all these things point to the audience. Remember, in rhetoric, you're constantly thinking about this, like, sometimes silent dialogue between the speaker and the audience. Sometimes you get called and response, right? Where the audience can like give you some feedback. For example, I have a few musicians in our class, right? Sometimes you're looking for feedback from the audience, like immediate feedback, right? Like they're clapping or they're dancing or what have you. Sometimes you don't get that feedback right away. Like if I write a piece and I turn it in, then I might not know how the audience feels right away. But there still is a dialogue. I'm speaking to the audience in hopes that the audience will respond to whatever it is that I asked them to do, think, believe, or feel. Okay? And then you guys can read the example. I don't have to like go over it. You can always go back. So subject is really just topic. Like, what is the subject matter? And of course, I think I've mentioned this before, you want to look at the context. So is the subject important when you're looking at how the speaker is? Subject is important when you're thinking about how they've organized their argument, right? Are they first defining the issue? Are they doing some kind of cause and effect kind of structure? So you want to be looking at subject, especially when you're looking at how they structured or organized their argument. One example I have here is that maybe the speaker will start with an anecdote in order to gain sympathy from the audience. And like once the audience's guard is down, it's like, okay, now I can deliver the rest of my speech or my piece of writing. So just keep in mind that subject is also important. It's really just the topic, okay? And of course, background information, right? Because if I say something like, climate change, like what the heck does that mean, right? Like there might be someone that says, well, climate change, or the climate changes every day, right? That's why we have weather forecasts. But making sure that one, your message is very clear, like what exactly is climate change? Why is climate change important? Why should we know about it? What things can we do about it? So subject is not just like the topic is climate change, like it's everything about that particular subject matter, like all the background information about it, okay? Especially the speaker's attitude towards the subject, okay? So keep that in mind as well. Tone. So tone is represented by that speaker's attitude too, right? But it's represented through diction. So what choices of words did they use in order to convey like how they feel about the subject? I'm sure you've heard this before. It's like, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Like you said it in a certain way that like made me feel this way. So tone can set the mood, right, for your audience. So your speaker has to be very thoughtful about the type of diction that he or she or they use, okay? Tone frames the message. And I mean, you might be used to writing this, but saying things like the author uses diction, right? We all use diction. Diction just means words, right? So you want to be asking yourself, how is the author using those words, right? You don't want to say the author uses words because that sounds crazy, right? You want to be saying things like, the author has a negative tone towards this particular subject matter, or pull out some words like the author used this word, this word, this word in order to convey how they feel or what have you, okay? So just keep in mind that the diction can be used in so many different ways, but tone, it sets the tone for the speech. Okay, so this rhetorical triangle you'll see everywhere. At the top here we have author, so author or speaker. Author or speaker is connected to ethos appeal. How is the author or speaker setting a particular set of, or setting up their audience to trust, right? If I am the speaker, like I have to first make sure that I have a sense of authority on the subject matter, that my audience trusts me as a person. Like if I'm a liar, then why would anybody believe anything that I have to say, right? So author is connected to our ethos appeal. Message is connected to logos appeal. So logos is all about logic and reasoning. So having that nice, clear message, you have to use all different types of strategies, right, to make sure that your audience completely understands what you're talking about. And then we have in the last corner here, audience. Audience is connected to our pathos appeal. I need to know my audience in order to know how to get to their emotions. When you're talking to your parents, you know, because you've been around them long enough, like how to talk to them, when to talk to them, right? Because you know your audience well. When you don't know your audience well, like sometimes things get jumbled up, right? Have you ever tried to talk to someone that you like had a crush on and you're like, oh, I don't know how to talk to them, right? And sometimes you might mess up, right? Knowing your audience really helps you have a sense of confidence, right, about what it is that you're conveying. The better that you know your audience, the better your argument will come across, right? And then we have context circling our triangle here. Context is everything, right? Context is like background information about your author. It's background information about your audience. It is background information about the message. Like what about this particular time, right? Like what's happening in the moment? Did something just happen and I need to know about that? That gives us context or background information. Everything has context. If you read something isolated of its context, then you might go like, what? I don't understand, right? So you want to know background information about each of these components, okay? And then we just have in the center the text itself. Like, oh, is this a speech? Is this a letter? Is this a, a fiction, etc. Okay? So last but certainly not least is the analysis itself. I'm actually going to post this to our Canvas because I constantly want you asking yourself these questions. So I set it up on our Canvas as the what, the how, and the why. So the what is the strategy? What strategy did the author or the speaker employ, right? What rhetorical devices, right? Rhetorical question and like purposeful diction and things like that. Like which device did they use? Well, not even diction, because that's not a device, sorry. Devices, those are things like, oh, he used an allusion, or she used expert testimony. She made a reference to somebody famous or what have you, right? Rhetorical modes, that's just the choice of how they structure their speech or it's delivery. It's like, okay, I decided that I'm going to first define the problem, then do cause and effect or what have you. So did they employ the strategy of structure, right? Diction is just a word choice. Did they choose their words wisely? And then syntax is sentence structure. Are their sentences varied? Are they short? Have you ever heard someone say, you were short with me, right? The sentences are just very short and they're like blunt and to the point, and they're not spending a lot of time like trying to explain. So sentence structure even affects how your audience connects to your message, okay? So we go from the what into our analysis to how this thing, right? The rhetorical device, what have you, is used. How is our audience appealing to audience? Did I say audience? How is our speaker appealing to the audience, right? Is our speaker appealing to the audience by building a sense of urgency? That's Kairos appeal, right? Are they making it like TV advertisements, commercials, like go, 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 get it right now, right? Are they appealing to, or are they like employing logic and rationale? Like, have you ever tried to argue with someone like, oh, the earth is flat, what, right? And employed logic, like, okay, well, we've had astronauts go out into outer space and they're taking pictures and, you know, the horizon, the bend of the horizon, all kinds of logic and logical and rational ways to just get people to understand your message, okay? So are they appealing in that way? Have they incorporated things like data and statistics? Have they incorporated scientific evidence, things like that, right? Are they appealing using ethos appeal, which is creating a sense of trust and credibility? Like, can you trust your speaker? Are they saying things like, well, my background is in this, or I've studied this for a long time? That's building that sense of credibility, okay? And then we have pathos appeal. Are they tapping into the audience, not just the audience's emotions, right? Like pathos means emotions, but we're also talking about other sensibilities, like the things that people believe in, the things that they value, they feel a certain way about that. So are they tapping into those things as well, okay? So keep that in mind. And then we move into interpretation. And so this is the big thing that makes AP language and composition different from your honors English classes, okay? We do analysis all the time. The author made these choices, and this is how they made those choices. But AP is asking you to interpret why. It's that one question. Like when you're reading something, you always want to be asking yourself, well, why? Why did they do that? Right? And why is associated with our purpose: to do, to think, to believe, and to feel, which is, as you can see on our chart here, connected to our appeals, okay? And notice that these are just a few of kind of like, instead of saying they want the audience to do, right? Is this a call to action? Do they want them to like get up and go do something? A call to action? Is this a reflection? Like, I don't really need you to go and do something, but I do need you to think deeply about this. And that includes the use of a lot of logos appeal, right? Like really just thinking deeply. Is this some kind of campaign or branding that they're involved in? Because remember, ethos appeal or believing is all about believing the speaker. Like, I need you to believe who I am so that you can believe whatever it is that I say, right? So is it that kind of thing? Or is this to raise awareness? Like those commercials that like talk about the abused animals, right? And they play that music, right? They're getting you to feel a certain way. They're raising awareness. I mean, sometimes they want you to do something like donate or something like that, but they also are just raising awareness about an issue that maybe people aren't as aware of. So just keep that in mind as well. So please review and revisit and rewind, right? Whatever it is that you need to do to really understand how rhetorical analysis works on the college level. Because in high school, we're doing analysis, right? But interpretation, that's when you get into that real critical thinking. Always asking why the speaker has done or used whatever device in order to appeal to the audience. You really want to dig into that. Well, why did they do that? What is their motivation? What's their intention? What is their purpose? Okay? So hopefully this helps you all. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. We'll, of course, be using this pretty often. So you'll get a chance to ask me a bunch of times. All right.